I am very, very happy to have Nina with us today. She is the director of the curatorial programs and exhibitions at BARD. And I had the real luck and pleasure to meet her we started in 2017, Nina.
Yes, we did.
To work with Nina on this exhibition, Making Architecture, which opened in the Dorsky Museum in New Paltz, here in the Hudson Valley. It was part of a series that they created called Masters of the Hudson Valley. And we then also were very lucky to be able to travel this exhibition. It went to 2 venues in Korea, 2 venues in China, it went to Japan, and now it's ready to open in Seattle at the BAM Museum, the Bellevue Art Museum that Stephen designed. It will occupy the whole 3rd floor of the museum. And we thought it was quite a beautiful moment to discuss with you the exhibition and the process of making it, and also what it means. And Nina, you will speak about that. It seems that it will continue traveling, and now it will be a virtual exhibition in Seattle. So the opening will be a video recording with Stephen coming up in August, and that's going to be quite an experience. They have reopened all the skylights that Stephen originally designed for the museum, which were closed for several years due to the curatorial, needs. And they're rethinking their whole upper level of the exhibition with Stephen's drawings and the aspects of this exhibit that Nina will discuss with you today. But anyways, this is the last discussion for our program. Thank you all for being here, and I will pass a microphone to Nina.
Hello, everyone. I will just for a moment say to Dimitra, and I would add to Stephen as well, that really it is a privilege for me to be with you. I think we are actually quite close. I'm in Barrytown and you are in Rhinebeck, so we are all privileged to be in the Hudson Valley in this very beautiful place at an extremely challenging time. But before I get started, well, you'll see I took the name of the exhibition and I added to it an alternative approach to curating and exhibiting architecture, because I feel that this, which was for me exceptional collaboration with Dimitra and Stephen, ended up creating an approach to curating and exhibiting that I found really quite remarkable. And going back to it now, I feel even more strongly about that. I want to just quickly offer a few notes of thanks, because like architecture, every exhibition is a collaboration. And at the Dorsky, I just want to remember Sarah Passy, who was the director, and Bob Wagner, and Wayne Lempanka, and the man who designed our wonderful book. Here it is. Jeff LaPrance, and the authors, Peter Olshansky and Carrie Dean Corso. And then in the Holl office, Rachel Root and Jacobo Migrants, and of course, Dimitra and Stephen, and now Celia and Irini, who have put up a lot and are extremely patient as we have organized this event. So right now, and I think that we must acknowledge that, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic, in a moment of extraordinary social upheaval in our country, where we are all questioning the issue of race and racism. And as architects, curators, historians, we must all ask ourselves this question of where we are right now. And I believe that an architecture exhibition is not simply a place for seeing representations. It is a place for raising questions and in some ways responding to questions, but maybe not always fully answering them. But I would like to think that they all raise the question of what it means to be an architect. And the nature of making architecture, I think, is about how you become an architect. And maybe the residency program is very much about that. What is the process of becoming, and does that happen in the studio? And what should the practice of architecture be now in this moment of July 2020, 4 months into this worldwide pandemic? And then, of course, for me professionally, but I hope also for you, the questions about exhibition making are relevant to architecture. And what is the actual purpose of an exhibition? Does its purpose extend beyond merely looking at scene representations? I alluded to this question before. Is the purpose to elucidate the meaning of architecture in everyday life? And how does an exhibition possibly do that? Is the purpose to elucidate the meaning of architecture as a form of living praxis, which I think very much interests Dimitra and Stephen? Does the curatorial display and interpretation have more than an aesthetic purpose in an architecture exhibition? And what is curatorial responsibility in an architecture exhibition? And I think that this word responsibility is extremely important one. And then finally, as a list, how can a curator know architectural practice? Now, this is a really important dilemma, which I think about all the time. And Dimitra and Stephen know that I kept on saying, how can I work on a building that I haven't seen? And of course, one has to make certain, I guess, compromises in the best sense of the word. Of the 11 projects in our exhibition, I actually only saw 3, but this is a very important matter as a curator. From where does the curatorial thinking emerge? And for me, it emerged in conversations with Stephen and Dimitra in the 2 places that I call the ateliers in the office, their offices, and in the research that I did both on the buildings. And it's important to know that every project in the exhibition was a project in process from which comes this notion of making. So the one that I saw that was perhaps the most finished was Princeton. And then the other 2, the Queen's Library and Contemporary Art Center in Richmond, were really construction sites, chantiers, when I saw them. This third question, what are the specific conditions for this thought of curatorial thinking? How does the curator know, interpret, define, and convey an architectural practice? This is a lot more than, you know, a nail in the wall and hanging a painting, right? How can an architecture exhibition show materiality and texture, among many other things? How can an architecture exhibition evoke light? And can curatorial thinking interpret what Merleau-Ponty defined? And in the realm of Stephen Holl, I think it would be impossible not to evoke Merleau-Ponty, this notion of the crisis of architecture, that Merleau-Ponty defined as the problematic separation of mind and body and world. And to me, the essence of Holl Architecture Office is this achievement of finding this place between mind and body and world when one comes into one of their buildings. And it seemed to me that in our book, Peter Olszewski, who's an architect and a professor at the University of Kansas, wrote on the issue of Holl and phenomenology, the essay entitled Reconfiguring Architectural Agency. And this is a quote from Peter: identifying and unpacking a crisis, referring back to Merleau-Ponty, makes possible a philosopher's work of relearning how to look at the world from a perspective not complicit in the crisis. To me, that's where the philosopher, the architect, and the curator cross, because the curator is not necessarily complicit initially in the crisis, although later in the process of making the exhibition they are. Through processes of inquiry, there is the curatorial, and redescription, there is the curatorial again. They attain the understanding necessary to reimagine aspects of the world. There is the architect. To me, this necessity to reimagine aspects of the world is very much what happens in Stephen Holl's office. So I had to begin here, which of course is a place that you will know, the house where maybe some of you are staying now in the residency.
Everybody is participating virtually this year.
Oh, of course.
So it's a very different experience, but
yes.
But still very connected, yes.
So this is a very remarkable place in the Rhinebeck place where I see all of these phenomenal sensory perceptions, how architecture brings these essences to be, right? Within the realm of the outdoors and the indoors, the penetration of light, the reflectiveness of nature in the interior, the juxtaposition of natural materials and reflective materials. To me, this is really an extraordinary moment in architecture practice, but I'll just leave the image to speak for itself for a moment. Then, of course, there is this, which is Stephen Holl's watercolor box. And of course, when we speak of Stephen Holl's architecture, we are speaking immediately of the architect as artist. And for me, nothing captures that more than this box. And so, you know, this in the phenomenological, I guess there is the element of chance that always exists. And I have to just quickly tell you that my doing this project with Dimitra and Stephen is all about the element of chance. It emerged completely by chance when the three of us found ourselves standing unexpectedly on the platform of the Rhinecliff train station late in the summer of 2017. And it really was chance because it happened to have been a Monday morning. And I think that Dimitra will agree that there's a certain sacredness of silence on that train station on Monday morning. And I rarely took the train to New York on Monday morning, but I happened to have that morning. And there was Stephen with Dimitra, who I'd not met before, with their baby. And we started to have a conversation. And Stephen said, well, you should be the curator of my exhibition. And I looked at him kind of blankly and I said, what? Excuse me. And I will say that we went into New York together in the same compartment of the train, sitting in the back, talking, trying to both respect silence, but talking. And shortly after that, I found myself, I just want to go ahead here, in the Holl office in New York. So this watercolor palette is the thing that I understood when I went to the office had to be the basis of the exhibition, because I found boxes like this, Stephen Holl's personal archive of his watercolor tablets going back many years. And I had the extraordinary opportunity, and I thank both Stephen and Dimitra for that opportunity, of going through many of these boxes and, in a sense, seeing the history of Stephen Holl's practice unfold through these drawings. So I went many times to the office, and sometimes just to walk around. Of course, this is my own photograph. There aren't many people in the office when I took the photo, but I found it really intriguing because this is the office, of course, where the architects sit. This is the other aspect of Stephen Holl's making of architecture, a different kind of office, which is his small watercolor studio on the grounds in Rhinebeck. And this led me to think about the process of making architecture through the notion of two ateliers as the place where an artist makes architecture in the French sense of the word. The New York office as one atelier. Stephen calls it, Dimitra, the office, but I call it the atelier. And the Rhinebeck property and house, which is the second atelier. And to me, this co-joining or intermingling of the urban atelier and the rural atelier are very much about this process of making architecture. So I had the opportunity to go into the aspect of the office that is more the private space, working space of the artist, right? So this is the open office plan. Who knows if we will ever work like this again. And here is one view of Stephen's private office, his library. Another view of that private space looking to downtown Manhattan with the numerous models involved in the process of making architecture that's so much a part of the Holl office. And I stood here for a long time because I found this view very fascinating. I mean, this is not necessarily Manhattan, right? There are no skyscrapers here. This is a view of downtown Manhattan after feel New York. You could be perhaps in any city, but every time I went to the Holl office, I was intrigued as a native New Yorker at what had happened to the area around this office. So you come to a place at the entrance and exit of the Lincoln Tunnel. This is really a no man's land. Adjacent to Penn Station, that used to really be a no man's land, where now, you know, the Shed and all of these enormous skyscrapers have gone up. So this area to the west of this view is in a remarkable transition, right? But when you come into the office, the thing that I experienced the most was outside the tunnel exit and entrance, people all over the place, is this remarkable silence in this office, even when people are working there. And to me, this also captures the working method of that office, but also very much the working method of the office. This is, I guess, the west side. So that's south here. And this is now the west side of Stephen's office. So this is where I really had a deep aha moment. I don't know how else to describe it. Because here were the drawings active, right? This is the animated place of the drawing where Stephen is working, doing his watercolors, and the watercolors are tacked to the board, and you can see all of the artist's paraphernalia, sketchbooks to the right, various pages from different sketchbooks hung on the wall. And the one, of course, that I became absolutely obsessed by is the page that sat directly in front of him. And I asked Dimitri and Stephen if we could make this one of the linchpins of the exhibition. So think about architectural representations, right? For an exhibition, you have usually models, photographs, and architectural drawings, right? Plan, section, and elevation. Nothing that I was looking at was a plan, section, and elevation. In fact, in Stephen's own workroom, I did not see one of those exhibiting architectural representations, right? Instead, I saw, oh, sorry, that's my phone. I saw drawings with text, notes from the mind of the architect, drawings with text from the mind of the architect, and watercolors without any text. So what were these things? This is not a conventional architectural drawing. And how, from the nature of making architecture, do we weave these things, which are clearly the essence of making architecture within the mind of Stephen Holl and Dimitra, into the exhibition and into an architecture exhibition where most people think they're going to see plan, elevation, and section, right? And in my own curatorial thinking, how do you go from this to drawings that you need to build? So this kind of became my realm of questioning as a curator, right? So this drawing that says concept, gulf, phenomenon, what we have here is the architect working through the crisis, working through the phenomenological crisis, right? And at the bottom, Stephen says, architecture, colon, bridges between world of concepts and ideas and world of sense perceptions. Architecture, bridges between world of concepts and ideas and world of sense perceptions. Here we are in the essence of the phenomenological thinking, of the architectural thinking. So how do we animate this in a display? So I got to the other atelier just for a moment, right? Because I think it's important to understand that just like there's the private office in the urban atelier, there's the private workplace, so to speak, in the rural atelier of Rhinebeck, which is here where Stephen sits. The same tools, right? But of course, nature around him, but the watercolor tablet, the paintbrushes, the various things, right? No planned sections or elevations. So still using the office atelier as my anchor for curatorial thinking. One day, walking up and down the different rows of computers. So this is also a fascinating thing, right? In Stephen's private office, there is not a computer. The only time I ever really saw him interact in a space with computers was in the Columbia classroom, right? When I went to visit a studio, right? Because here are the architects working in the office. And this was an extraordinary moment because this is where I saw that the artist and the architect absolutely merge in the Holl office, right? It's not that I compared it to Frank Gehry, where Gehry makes a sketch and somebody takes that sketch and works it through. No, no, no. And Gehry's sketches are somewhat impenetrable. This is an architect's desk with all of the tools, coffee cup, pencils, right? With Stephen's drawings taped to the screen, right? And another one, Coke bottle, okay, another architect, with different drawings taped to the screen. And this is where I understand, and what I called in the text, this transference, right? Between the watercolor drawing, the concept, and the representation, which will eventually become the plan, section, and elevation, right? This is the making architecture. This is the process. This is the method at work. This is really quite extraordinary for me to see. And I thank Dimitra and Stephen for letting me come into this world. You know, this again goes back to one of my questions. How do you curate an architecture exhibition, right? And just to say other things in the whole office, our office for me is about materiality, texture, right? Whether it's, this is a door, the only doors in the office are the doors, two doors. One, and I only have this one photo, but this is a kind of experiment, as Dimitra, of this amazing door and understanding how the door can actually bend and fold and come out of the wall, right? And there's a handle, right? Always playing with this notion of architecture down to the smallest details and how to make something down to the smallest handle. So there's the office. Then there's the actual transference of the drawing to the actual built architecture, right? So I have two examples of this. The Queen's Library, here's a drawing from September 2010, and this concept, there are many, many, many watercolor notebooks for the Queen's Library. It went through many changes, but here's the Children's Library. Of course, the amazing cut through that library that sits on the promenade in Queens, looking out onto this extraordinary landscape of the east side of Manhattan, in which in one perspective, you see downtown Manhattan up to the Chrysler Building, through to the Empire State Building, the UN, and north. It's really a remarkable site. So I went to the site in construction. Now all the images you're about to see are my own. I apologize. But so you will see the building under construction. And I joked with Dimitra and Stephen that after this experience, I never wanted to see a building finished. That it was so compelling for me to be on, you know, in the French way, in the chantier, right? So here is that cut. You see it in the drawing. Here is the building on the promenade right in Queens with these skyscrapers or large apartment buildings around it. So it goes against, right, the notion of everything that's happening on the west side of Manhattan, where everything is vertical and it is a horizontal sculptural form, which in itself, to me, is a statement, right, about the sculptural qualities of building. Here you see all of the accoutrements of the construction in front of me, but to show the cut on the other side, and then this fantastic fenestration on the other facade. And here I am inside, just giving you a sense of looking now west to Manhattan with these two construction workers who happen to have done me enormous service to give you some sense of scale, right? Looking toward Manhattan before the actual fenestration is finished. So I asked the question about the curatorial in the exhibition. How does an exhibition convey texture? This is a detail, my hand here. So you can see, again, scale, but of these wonderful, Dimitri will help me, but markings in the facade, which becomes this wonderful sense of reflection, but gives the facade a feeling of materiality and texture that's really quite extraordinary, all right?
It's the form work to cast the concrete that was made out of this rough plywood that gave that texture. Yes, it's very important part of the process.
Yes. So again, for me, thinking about the making of architecture, when I saw this, you know, first of all, I immediately had to touch it to see what it feels like, right? But also to try to understand this, you know, this feeling for the facade, right? Because curatorially, think about any architecture exhibition that you've come to. Okay, well, I'll immediately think of Alvarado. You might have a sample of brick or a sample of a particular kind of stonework where can you hear me? Suddenly I'm getting an internet not stable view. But I just wanted to show one more time how the drawing is reflected in the actual process of making the building itself. Here, another view. I'm a few stories up in, again, the building Chantier, looking to another view of Manhattan on that same west facade. And then the second project, I'm just going to check the time, which of course is this remarkable complex in Princeton. I just want to go to my notes just quickly because I can't remember. The completion date is 2017. So I saw it just almost at the opening date, actually. And we are now in the Lewis Center for the Performing Arts. The Holl office, not only did they build several, so there's dance, music, all performing arts here. There's a major student meeting center. I'm going to bring you into the kind of quad in the middle in a second, but they also redefined the entire space, going down to the train station and making this a new access into the campus. So this is more than a single building. It's really a project that embodies this entire and a rethinking of this entire section of the Princeton campus. So here we are inside the space, right? So this is looking, I'm not sure what direction. There's this building and then this one on the other side from the outside. And there's this fantastic pool of water still under construction here that creates this reflection again, right? You saw that in Rhinebeck, there's that beautiful reflection in the small detail, right, of the house. Here it is on a much larger scale, but with the same issues and priorities in mind, right? Which is, you know, how do you bring this notion that Stephen says in the diagram, how do you bring the world of sense perception into the architectural experience? Well, you do that by creating spaces like this, and of course like this. Now we are inside the dance building, where there is this remarkable sweeping staircase with light penetrating. And I wanted to compare it to this drawing of Stevens from much earlier, this Piranesi-like drawing where you see stairways going in numerous directions to, like in Piranesi, really to nowhere. But here, of course, they are taking students, performers, you know, to places inside the building. But here, the concept inhere in some form of realization and practice. So then there was the question of making this exhibition, and just certain words that I thought about throughout, right? The thing that you might notice right away, and this is the view looking into the whole main space of the exhibition designed by Dimitra, is that there is nothing framed, right? There is no kind of museifying of architectural drawings or anything at all in this design and curatorial concept, as to try to be as clear about the notion of making as possible, which meant that it had to have a certain aspect of informality and showing these sketchbooks not as formal architectural representations in an exhibition, but as part of a process. So Dimitra came up with this fantastic idea of having these, well, I'm going to call them tables, but they're really much more than that. They are really small buildings unto themselves. They have support underneath. You could see in this view, I don't know if you could see my finger straight ahead, you see how the horizontal slab hovers over, almost can't over the foundation underneath. So these are really very architectural. And then the tables were organized thematically. The drawings that are now facsimiles, right, copies from the notebooks, placed together with samples of the various details of building and process. So the one that you see closest to you is a sample of a door handle. On the right are models, and there's other samples of process, making, and texture as you go. So the visitor would come into the space and see this conceptual thinking, this coming into the making process, right? This effort to bridge the gulf between, right, as Stephen described it, from the world of concept and idea into the world of sense perception. And this view, which I like very much, because, you know, this is another thing about for a visitor to an architecture exhibition, how relevant or irrelevant a model is. But on these tables, you had a direct contact with the model. So the three-dimensional form, although absent, of course, in any architectural exhibition, is as present as it possibly can be through these models. And then on the walls outside, framing, in a sense, the unframed, right, are these photo blow-ups that are displayed very tightly, one next to the other, at a very beautiful proportion, bringing you into the project visually. So there is the making on the table, the detail of the process, texture, and of making, the model, right, which is then the photographic image, and then in the back, it was this very large scale presentation of Stephen being interviewed, and you could hear, you know, this in the back, but it was actually, Dimitra, right, quite separate. So it had its own space, but resonated nonetheless. So you could come in here, and there were books and other things displayed on tables for the visitor to be able to touch and see different aspects of Stephen's work that way. And this is several views actually looking down into the table, so you can get a bit of understanding of what those juxtapositions are. You know, this is also the other thing of bringing the notion of curating and the architecture exhibition into question. Rarely in an architecture exhibition do you see these kinds of juxtapositions, right? So the idea of the exhibition conveying the thought of the architect, the making of the architect, I feel was really as close to being solved as possible through this remarkable idea that Dimitra had, and she could speak more about how the table idea came to be. But here you see different facsimiles from the watercolors, the model, the drawing that I originally encountered in Stephen's office, and then that aerial view down into the detail of the door handle. Dimitra, do you want to say something now about
the important,
about the table?
yes, the idea, and Nina, you were as much part of it as we all were with Stephen to create this, and again, trying not to work with this standard notion of displaying projects and ideas. These tables where each one exploring a subject matter connected to the broader thinking of Stephen about the work. For example, the image on the left was about time and how you explore through several projects. There is the VCU Institute of Contemporary Art, there's the Malawi Library, there is Necropolis in Taiwan. So there's fragments of projects that in a way are all connected to this concept models and drawings. The table on the right was related to music and how you kind of explore ideas through the Princeton project that Nina showed earlier, the rehearsal space there, the idea of public and private, how the notion of in a way music not as something that you hear only, but that surrounds you, and how the experience of the person at play. But yeah, and there is in those, but that was the thinking behind it.
I just want to go, I just have two more so you can see the variety of, you know, the other thing that we debated a lot together with Dimitra was this idea of the original versus the facsimile, which is always a question and an issue in an architecture exhibition, especially one that travels, you know, but I actually think that it's resolved as well as it can be here, right, Dimitra? I think that, and actually taking the facsimiles enable the juxtapositions across projects, you know, that you could see in the music, you know, how across projects from Franklin and Marshall to the Kennedy Center.
In fact, it's a mixture of originals and facsimiles. The tracing papers are obviously originals, and wherever you see the little holes of the notebook, these are drawings that came out of his notebook. But Stephen, it's very important to Stephen to keep the continuity in all this drawing pads that Nina showed earlier in his desk. So it's like ripping out pieces of your brain if you remove those and, you know, take it in a traveling exhibition for 3 years. So these were the copies that were reproductions, very close reproductions of the originals. Yeah.
This is actually something that I found absolutely intriguing, which is this archiving of the watercolors and the way that Stephen perhaps goes back maybe from 2006, you know, and this referencing various details and using this body of work, which is this enormous conceptual practice, right, that's contained in these notebooks. So I would also say, Dimitra mentioned the word brain. At a certain point, we had the word brain in the title. Do you remember?
Yes, absolutely.
We went through many different iterations and coming up with the title. It's always such a hard thing. But I think in the end, this notion of making, which visitors see, I mean, we're looking down, right, from model to watercolor to tracing paper, absolutely captured what we were hoping the meaning would be. So I just want to, I have one more view of the space. You know, I think also it's interesting for me, seeing this exhibition, which was really extremely beautiful. For me, it was a little bit of a kind of a sleeper. You know, I don't know really how many people actually saw it. It was a little bit under the radar, you know. But I think as a model of exhibition making, really deserves to be known and thought about a lot. I think that Dimitra's design has a lot to offer in terms of the future of exhibition making for architecture.
It started very modestly at the Dworsky Museum, but a lot of people have seen it as it travels throughout the world.
Yes, that's true.
It will continue. It will continue to travel. Yes, so there is the ideas are shared broadly, and they continue to be.
I think this issue of modesty, I think this issue of modesty of practice is actually very precise. I think that this entire office is about a kind of modesty of practice in a very important way. But I think that the issues of economy, when it came time for exhibition making here, were very important. And I think that a lot was done with a very economical budget, you know, with relatively little to spend. The impact was really quite substantial. So I think that's also something within the reality of exhibition making that one has to think about for sure. So I want to just repeat the idea that this one came from this drawing here. I don't know if you can see it, that Stephen said with the colon after of architecture bridges between world of concepts and ideas and world of sense perceptions. Because I think that curatorially, that is the ultimate challenge that we try to overcome, is how to convey such a notion through exhibition making. And I think that revisiting the exhibition now, there was certainly a strong attempt that was pretty successful. I think we got pretty close. So, shall we have a discussion?
Thank you. Thank you, Nina. Absolutely. I will wait questions from our audience. I'd like to point out the way you started. I really liked also, Nina, the idea of the living praxis. I think it's very important. And maybe we'll briefly discuss that also on our opening on Saturday with Anton and Deborah of Ensemble Studio. The idea that you don't wait for a commission to create a project. You constantly work and you constantly design and draw. And it's exactly what Stephen also has been doing. Every day there's a watercolor. Every day there is an idea. It may lead to a project, it may not lead to one, but the process of the praxis, the living praxis, that's how I understand it, is that your life and your work kind of are one, and your praxis is not as separate as the atelier or the studio. Is not a kind of isolated space of making architecture, but it is the space of thought and creation. And that's where the two ateliers, the one in nature up here in Rhinebeck and the one in the city, also have connect the two ways of living that Stephen has been doing he's been coming up here for more than 20 years. Now also living full time during the pandemic up here in Rhinebeck. So living practice is something I wanted to point out. And then the Merleau-Ponty concept of the mind, body, and the world, and they connect, I think, much to the concept of this year's residency, which was a transformation of consciousness. And in a way, that transformation is happening, as you mentioned, with the philosophers' work to reimagine the world, and the architects not the philosophers rather to relearn the world, and the architect to reimagine it. I think is a very important point that actually will help us think of transforming our consciousness. That's how are we? How are we relating the mind and the world, right, Nina?
Yes. I mean, when I went back to the book and I saw this quote from Peter, I was really taken by how very precise it is in capturing what the challenges are. I guess, you know, I am a curator, not a practicing architect. So I am looking into this situation, right? And I think that ultimately this profession that you have chosen, critical nature to all of us, especially now, because I think architecture has enormous possibilities of bringing people together. I think it's a way of it's a necessity. But I think that it's extremely hard profession, right? And perhaps especially now, because, you know, architects thrive in teams and all of these things. So I think that the notion of reimagining is even more necessary and yet even more challenging, you know, in the current world events. So I think the architect's role is absolutely critical and absolutely even more difficult at the same time. And I guess, you know, from what I understand about Stephen's life as an architect, his life as an architect has always been, in some form or another, getting out of hardship. You know, I mean, without exaggeration, whether it's economic challenges or no work, or, you know, trying to be recognized, or, you know, standing on that line between conviction and work. You know, do you stand by your idea, or do you need work so badly enough that, you know, you have to have the client's intervention dominate? You know, these are the tensions, I think, that come into this and are the realities of being an architect, you know.
And that beautiful drawing that you showed that kind of triggered your interest from the beginning of jumping from the concept to the phenomena,
Yes.
and which projects actually make it to be realized and which remain in the world of just concepts and ideas. And that's where the work doesn't happen only for those buildings to be realized. It happens for the importance of continuing to think and rethink who we are, how do we live, what is important to convey with these notes in the drawings. What are the thoughts here that matter? And I think that from the concept to the phenomena, that the architect makes a jump, that leap, is very much connected to Merleau-Ponty's from mind, body to the world. If world is a phenomenon in mind, and the mind of the architect is the concept as comes out of the architectural thinking.
Can I say, Dimitra, that I think also something that's very much at play here is the difference between the idea, the concept as it's expressed in this drawing, and let's say the program, right? That every architect is confronted with, the client, the program, right? This is a different kind of thinking first, right? This is not architecture driven necessarily by the program, although of course it responds to the program and the program is necessary. I think this is a tension, if I can say, in the Holl office, you know, is how do you find your concept in relation to the program, meet the demands of the program while retaining and being true to the concept. This is a problem.
Or also rethinking the program.
Right. I mean, I think that Stephen has a remarkable talent for bringing his clients along with him.
Or propose some. so that's another thing that maybe not directly connected to the program, but also but how this program is experienced. I think you also mentioned it somewhere, or maybe you did not mention it, but I think it happens in the work a lot. Is this the relation of the inside to the outside, and how that
Yes.
oftentimes is inverted. For example, the explorations of in-house, the image that you showed at the very beginning.
Yes, here. I just go back to one of my favorite images.
It kind of questions where is the program and how do you experience that in relation to the immediate surrounding, especially when it comes to nature, I think, and relating to nature is very important. So that idea of the inversion of the inside coming out. Also, when you showed the library standing up there at the roof, and you said that being in the library, but
I just wanted, yes, I wanted also to show
on top of it. Right.
Here.
And I think that play between the inside and the outside does help. I guess I've not been heard very clearly, but I think, could you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Right. What was I was saying that the idea of the inversion of the inside to the outside and vice versa also plays with that the experience of the program. What is in it, what's around it, how you enter, what you experience when you're there, and how do you experience the world outside of it when you're in it.
Yes. Should we take some questions, or what? How would you like to go?
Yeah, Celia, Melissa is raising her hand. Can you give her the microphone?
Yes.
Melissa, you can talk now. I see you raising your hand. If it is that you wanted to say.
You can use the Q&A button to send your question.
Any ideas from our residents in the meantime? All right, Melissa says she accidentally clicked on it, but yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. I think the exhibition is interesting in that it's showing the process from a very early stage of a few projects. I do wonder, because I'm looking at these models, they're at certain scales. It's starting from a sketch, which is very much 2D, and then going to this 3D, and then you see the images of the construction of a building. I wonder if within this exhibition, if there was no constraint of a traveling exhibition, would there be an opportunity to show architectural mock-ups, which are essentially progress or process of the construction of a building as well? It's not necessarily details, but it could be like the peculiar or even the experiential shape of a building. Would that be something that could get incorporated into these exhibitions?
Oh, I think it's a very good observation. And you know, one of the things I saw in the Holl office, and I actually had some photos of this and I took it out of the presentation, was the model making area. The model making area is an amazing part of the office. And there's not just one model, there's a series of models, like you're describing, that lead to the final idea, or that's a trial and error, or, you know, Dimitra could say even more detail how they're used. But you're absolutely right that, you know, the essence of curating, I guess, is editing, sadly. And you're right that certainly for a traveling exhibition, one has to edit even more stringently. but certainly one approach to capturing the ideas that we wanted to convey is through a method that you're describing, would be to show this trajectory, right? In the making process.
And for the mock-ups, there is some one-to-one details like a door handle or like another smaller piece of a light fixture. There is actually also carpets that Stephen designs for projects that are hanging in the last room. So we did try to incorporate little pieces of that. And what Nina is saying in the model shop, what we do is not only make the models that you see here in this exhibition, but actually mock-ups, details of, you know,
You're breaking
part
up.
of the bench, a light fixture, many one-to-one details that are produced in the shop. It would have been great to include. But I hope you can still hear me. It's true, these are, but that would be a great area to expand on. It is certainly part of making.
Yes. I mean, that model shop is an entire project could be done around how the model is used in the office. But it's a very good observation, and you're absolutely
that could be an exhibition.
Yeah, it's really a very thing. I think that maybe Ken Frampton, I don't remember, was involved in a project once called Architecture as Model, or it was a long time ago. There's a catalog that I've seen at Avery once about this, but it certainly deserves rethinking. You know, the other thing that comes to my mind about that is the hand, which I didn't mention, but which is all over the Hull office, right? With the computer, which was this dichotomy that I was trying to convey, which is, of course, the hand of the watercolor tablet, and then, you know, with the computer, but in the making of the models, there's also the hand, you know, and in the New York atelier, there is the model maker working by hand, and then there is the machine, you know, making these 3D models. But the two are always intertwined, even in the model making process, which I think is an important distinction of the office and a reason for how they get to the place.
And maybe the only area that really kind of suffers the most now during the pandemic is the ability to be able to, you know, touch those models, look through them. We do have our fabrication director and some of our people making models still using the shop, which is incredible, and, you know, photographing the models and sharing them for presentations and so on. But still, they not be able to hold the model, look straight into it and understand how the space works is a difficulty with all this virtual transition.
It's a very thought-provoking question. Thank you.
I see another question. Let me read this out loud from Amy Kaluti. And who says, I'm intrigued that the majority of these, the pieces are seen from above on the table. The bird's eye view, I guess, God's eye view. How do you think that changes the viewer's perception of the architectural form, or perhaps even keeps the viewer disengaged? Inherently, a human in an architectural form interacts with it, and this almost feels as if it's preventing that interaction. Was that intentional? To then encourage the viewer to interact with the process of the creation rather than the final product?
Well, I think absolutely the opposite. I think, well, first of all, I just want to say that this is a false impression. I took these so I could document but the best thing about the tables is that they actually bring you much closer to the work. They enable a spatial intimacy that you don't get when something is framed and you're looking at it on the wall. And they are much closer to a three-dimensional experience, I thought, than seeing something framed and hanging. And
it's I agree, Nina. I think it's maybe the way that you photographed them to be able to explain up close for this discussion. But the experience of the space was that of a very close proximity to those tables and intimacy. Exactly the opposite of what it is now being perceived.
I wish that there was somebody standing here so you could get a sense of the visitor to the table, because it's actually the perspective jar as my image made it seem. But the question nonetheless is interesting, because I think it brings into focus the problem all the time in an architecture exhibition, which is what is the best way to view these representations, whether or not it's a plan, elevation, and section, or an architect's, conceptual drawing, or whatever it is. I think this is the constant challenge, So you're onto something that's important, and I think, certainly with Dimitra, we talked this through constantly. I was really against the frame. They knew this. Please, we can't, because it makes these things. It suggests that they should be what they're not.
Yeah. In fact, Amy is also just responding. Thank you. It very much speaks to your earlier answer about the challenges to interact with an exhibition in the digital sphere as well.
Yes, yes.
Right.
But I hope that, Stephen and Dimitra are involved in exhibition making all the time. We have to think immediately, of course, of Mies and Corbusier and Alvar Aalto and all of these architects who have always been and always were involved in exhibition making. And I hope that you all as architects will consider these challenges as part of what you do. Because I think that coming up with whatever methods enable visitors to be in this process and be close to architecture through these visiting experiences is really important. And I think that the architect's direct involvement in it is really necessary. So I hope that you will join this effort.
Thank you very much, Nina.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for bringing me back to this wonderful project.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nina.
Thank you.
Thank you.